The Fed is saying the quiet parts out loud, and finally, they look like they're going to cut the knee or bend the knee, excuse me, to Donald Trump and his efforts to lower interest rates. But Jerome Powell hasn't reacted to all of this news just yet, but his colleagues are coming out and saying, cut the interest rates now. As I've been telling you guys here for quite some time on this channel, that everything is not what it seems underneath the hood. We've got a weak labor market. We've got a falling Dixie. We've got a lot of issues. And so Jerome Powell has been holding strong, yet now we have other members of the Fed coming out and telling Jerome Powell that we should be cutting interest rates as early as July. Therefore, it's the next meeting. We had Governor Waller say Friday that he doesn't expect tariffs to boost inflation significantly, so policymakers should be looking to lower interest rates as early as next month. If you're starting to worry about the downside risk to the labor market, move now, don't wait. So everybody is saying essentially what I've been saying here and what Donald Trump has even been saying, that Jerome Powell and the Fed always seem to move too late, too slow. Too slow Powell is what he's always been calling him and chirping him in the media. But it's interesting that now we're having others, members of the Fed, actually agree with Donald Trump. Most Fed policymakers prefer a wait-and-see approach, with market pricing in indicating the next rate cut won't come until September. But there's other Fed members that are also saying that there should be an interest rate cut here. We've got Fed Governor Bowman favoring July interest rate cut, who said that today. Michelle Bowman said Monday she would favor an interest rate cut in the next policy meeting so long as inflation pressures stay muted. They're similar to those of Christopher Waller. And Waller was saying basically that Mary Daly, in a CBC interview later this day, said she would be more comfortable with waiting until there's impacts. But Waller basically came out and said and agreed that there is a bunch of key indicators. The downside risk of the labor markets. Why do you want to wait until we actually see a crash before we start cutting rates? So I'm all in favor of saying maybe we start thinking about a rate cut policy at the next meeting, because we don't want to wait until the job market tanks. And I've been saying that for a long time on this, where we're seeing a job market that is somewhat weak. We see a job market that essentially looks at a lot of different factors. And you look at the baseline just numbers, everybody's like, oh, everything's all good. Don't worry about it. We will be perfectly fine. The reality of the situation is we will not be perfectly fine with all of this, right? We're seeing a lot of potential risk come out here from this, right? We're seeing a job market that you see the numbers somewhat increasing. You see the numbers not being affected by tariffs as much as everybody thinks, but the hiring is slowing dramatically. So why is that? You got to ask yourself that question. Why is the lowering of interest rates such a hot button topic? And why is Trump really vouching for it? So what does Powell think about this? Because the interest rate cuts have been gaining support from his constituents. And so they've been openly saying, and he gave no hint possible of rate cut after the Fed voted unanimously last Wednesday to leave borrowing costs unchanged. So the Fed is looking at that, even though we have Trump demanding lower interest rates. He's come out and demanded this time and time again. He's even called Powell stupid for an anticipated rate hold. So the Federal Reserve kept interest rates on hold, but signaled it might make 2 rate cuts this year. Trump's been coming out and saying they need to do it. They need to do it quickly, right? And it doesn't seem to make any sense as to why. Because, they are as to why they're keeping interest rates very high. If you look at the global picture, you see interest rates getting cut all the time. Japan held steady, but the European Union cut interest rates. A lot of others have seen your interest rates cutting globally, except for the United States. I mean, we've seen a few crazy raises here, but Brazil has got its own world of problems. But either way, we saw Switzerland, we see Japan very low, Singapore, European Union, they've seen multiple cuts while the US is holding steady. Now, because of this, we're seeing the thought of a rate cut actually gaining some traction here. Last time, I've been showing you guys this for quite some time, and we're actually seeing a 22.7% chance of a rate cut occurring in July. And I think that is unique because last couple times we've seen basically a 99% chance that we are not going to cut interest rates or are going to cut it any single time. So we're starting to see this, right? We're starting to see the amount and the pressure of rate cuts starting to wane. We're starting to see the pressure of these rate cuts starting to come through quickly, right? And the reality is that the Dixie, among other fiat currencies, is still not extremely strong. We're seeing it at 98.35 here today. And as I've been following this, the lowest level we've ever seen it is just about here. We've seen it dip under 98 slightly. But the reality is that we aren't there yet, right? The tariffs helped bring the Dixie up to 101. Everybody said the tariffs were bad news. But the reality of the situation is that the amount of potential we see here, we see that interest rate cuts are gaining support, right? Everybody's starting to do that. And Powell is sending a blunt message to interest rates this week. That's when economists, watchers say that it could begin the cut. The interest rates are expected to remain steady until maybe, that's a big maybe, the fall. That's what Jerome Powell is coming out and saying. But we've seen him flip-flop prior, right? The Fed made it clear this week that it isn't moving interest rates until the impact of one major emerging economic shock is down. So the Fed interest rate decision will not occur. They will not cut interest rates until they start to see a crack. But everybody's saying, hey, why are we going to wait until we see a crack? We've seen the S&P 500 start to pump slightly on this news. We've seen the development of the market over time. But, we haven't really seen too much of the market start to crack just yet. I come and report a bunch of these rumblings. The May CPI and jobs report were cooler than expected, but housing markets and retail spending saw surprise slumps. The FOMC said that it would keep Fed funds rate at 4.25 to 4.5% for June. The Fed will offer guidance on the next step, but all of these lead back to one thing. The Fed governors and multiple people in the Fed are starting to come out and say, hey, Jay Powell, we want to cut interest rates. We don't want to be too late. We don't want to have that reputation. So I think everybody is starting to listen to what Jerome Powell is saying and really needs to focus in on what they've got going on. Something that the Fed is not doing is not being quiet on their opinions. So I do appreciate that the Fed governor is coming out and saying even though there's many that are saying, hey, we want to wait until fall. So let's see the reasoning why Daly wants to say they want to wait until fall, because they want to collect the information and do what the data says. Now, this is why I think this is a big issue with the Fed and just humans in general running these decisions, because they're looking at data that's always backwards looking, right? For forward-looking projections. The issue is that the Fed's decision today, we aren't going to see the layover effects of these decisions until 3, 4, 6 months, a year down the line. We saw massive amounts of money printing in 2020, 2021, and we didn't see the inflation coming for a very long time, right? So why didn't we see that? Well, we didn't see that issues because it just takes time for these policies to take into effect. So I disagree wholeheartedly here with Daly, who says we need to wait. And it's interesting to me that as somebody who's just started, who's been tracking all of this stuff for 5, 6 years, somebody that's been working in this industry for so long doesn't realize this fact that it needs to, you know, be implemented, and then we're going to see layover effects months, years down the line. And that's why that's why I always track the Dixie. The Dixie is a better real-time indicator. The Dixie's a better real-time indicator of the overall market, how they're feeling. Are people saving in dollars, looking at dollars? How are they going about this? This is the true, metric that we need to be really, really keeping a close eye on, in my opinion, is the Dixie. Because the difference is with all of this is, we're seeing some of the layover effects. We're seeing some of these issues come about, and we need to be keeping a very, very close eye on what we've got going on because there's just a tough market out there. I'm coming to you late. It's 11:30 here in Finland where I'm at. So, but I want to bring you guys these market updates. So be sure to smoke that like and hit the subscribe button. I know that 82% of you guys who watch this channel do not subscribe. So please help me get to that 1K subscriber count as quickly as possible. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And thank you guys all so much. I'll catch you at the next one.